Welcome back to another episode of Next to Madison. I am excited for today's episode. We are talking about an epidemic that has kind of swept the nation and swept the world, vaping. And I have an amazing doctor that is coming on, that is my guest today, that is going to talk about this exact problem and so much more as well. So I would like to bring on my guest, Dr. Audrey Freshman. How are you?
Hi, how are you? Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited you're here.
Me too.
So let's talk about the vaping stuff, because you kind of specialize in addiction.
Yes, I do.
So how'd you kind of get into that?
Well, what started to happen, first of all, I'm the director of the New York Center for Living, which is an outpatient program that specializes in adolescents and young adults. And so what started to happen over the course of the summer is that more and more people started to come in with problems around vaping. And basically, I run a parents group, and what started to happen was that for kids who were coming in, let's say smoking weed and the more traditional problems with drugs and alcohol, they were able to stop using the other drugs as evidenced on drug screens, but what they couldn't stop is the nicotine. And that made me really interested in what is going on in this country again with the tobacco industry re-upping a whole new generation on nicotine addiction.
Right, so when they were designed to help people quit.
Well, what happened was that nicotine addiction was on its way out in this country. And, the studies show, looking at adolescents, and even opioids were starting to, in this year, trend down for the very first time. So you think, wow, are we turning the corner on addiction for the first time in this country? But no, what happens instead is that electronic cigarettes get introduced in the same way that opioids got introduced.
Right.
So opioids first came on as an idea that was really going to be, for the benefits of everybody. It was going to take care of pain management. And of course, we know the marketing became aggressive, and we know what happened with that story. Well, e-cigarettes came in the same way. It was going to be for the benefit of people who smoke cigarettes, adults, to get off of cigarette smoking. But the marketing went into really heavily into the adolescent population. And even last week, it was exposed that they were marketing on Nickelodeon and the Cartoon Channel.
Who? Like Juul?
Like Juul, yeah.
I thought they couldn't.
The restrictions on it now, which are just since 2019, are, with loopholes. But this marketing campaign really started in 2015. And so the outcome of that is now you see 2016, you see the stats, 2016, 17, 18, 19, like it looks like a graph going up like this with kids smoking. So now you have 5 million adolescents smoking nicotine through e-cigarettes.
What was it before e-cigarettes hit the market? Do we know that statistic of how many smoked cigarettes?
It was downward trend because they had gotten the message that cigarettes and tobacco was bad for you. So it was starting to go, let's say, I think, I'm not sure. I think the number was something like 5% of the country. Now it's 40% of adolescents in their senior year of high school have vaped. So you see a significant difference.
And the other thing that was scary is I remember when we would sneak cigarettes when we were in high school, it smelt so bad.
Yes,
that
exactly.
Like your parents could just go smell your fingers. You know what I'm saying?
Yes,
like
you could smell your own fingers.
Yeah. With the vaping, they can sit there and do it on the toilet, and their parents wouldn't know.
They can do it in school. On the toilet.
Right.
And the school administrators are suffering from that because what is the solution to that?
Because you can't go in with cameras.
There's also, before I was looking at on Amazon, they sell hoodies, and the strings on your hoodie.
Yeah.
It's tied into the vape pen so you can suck on your hoodie lace and inhale if you want to. I know. So it's really unbelievable.
So what happened? I remember last summer they came out, or the end of the summer, they came out saying, oh my gosh, people are dying, blah, blah, blah. It was going to be banned. Then they figured it was tied to the black market weed pens.
Right, the vitamin E, although not absolutely, because there was another study that was done that says it's not absolutely tied to weed only. It is also tied in nicotine. But anyway, go on.
Well, and then they said they were going to ban them all, right? So like you would see these
Yeah, but
stores
then-
saying we're getting rid of them, but now
Yeah,
they're
and
not
then
banned.
what happens? Business and industry takes over. Altria, which was an owner of Marlboro, is
Okay.
a partial owner of Juul. It bought Juul for $38 billion. What do you think? They're going to let the system go
Right.
under? They are dependent on cultivating, look at how many adolescents. Every day, 5,700 adolescents start using vape. Okay, and yesterday I was on this Roseanne Scotto
Yeah.
show, so they're showing the outbreak of coronavirus,
Uh-huh.
and they're talking about, let's say, the 2,000 cases of coronavirus, and I'm thinking to myself, if we thought of this as an outbreak of addiction, which it is, an outbreak of addiction, and we treated it that way. And we said every day 5,700 of our teenagers are being, are getting it, the disease. We would be freaking out.
Yeah.
But we don't frame it that way. We only framed it that way because of the lung issue.
Yeah.
But we don't frame it that way when we're talking about addiction.
So let's talk about the health issues of vaping that has been
Sure.
proven on the medical spectrum.
Yes. Well, on the medical spectrum, mostly it has not been proven, right? Because if you look at, let's say, even cigarette smoking as a case in point, conventional, that gets proven over time. Right, you start smoking when you're a teenager. 90% of people started smoking cigarettes at, under the age of 21. But when do you get sick? It's really in your 40s, 50s, 60s, right?
Right.
With continued use. So we don't really have that data in yet on what's the impact of aerosol on your lungs 30 years out, right?
Right.
So they say it's safer, but really, how could you even possibly know that?
Anything breathing in.
Right, and so they're saying that, look, obviously we've heard about popcorn lung, we've heard about EVALI, which is, the lung disease, but, the other side effects, again, of nicotine addiction, which I think are really significant, are the fact that your brain as an adolescent is very vulnerable to developing addiction.
Okay.
And so what they see is that, first of all, one pod is equal to one pack of cigarettes.
Right.
So when you go back to smoking cigarettes, when we smoked cigarettes, for example, there would be a timeline, right? You smoke your cigarette, there's just so much you could smoke, and it's the end of the cigarette, and it's done.
Right.
If you're vaping from a pen, you have no information on you're done, you're not done, you could keep going, you could sneak throughout the day. And that really impacts the rate of addiction, it impacts learning, it impacts attention, it impacts the dopamine. And then I'll get to one of the main points. It sets you up really for future addiction to all substances.
Okay.
So it becomes a gateway drug.
Right.
Which is really important, because the dopamine levels in your brain are, with every hit, you're acclimating your brain to want more and more and more. So that's what happens.
So let's talk about the effects of nicotine on the body. What are some of those?
Well, it makes your heart stimulate. So, there's dizziness. Apart from the physical intake of it. Well, let me start this way. If nicotine wasn't good, people wouldn't be doing it. So let's start from that point of view. In other words, what does nicotine do? It hyper-focuses you. It can calm you down. It can make you relax. And that's why it is such a compelling drug. Because even in the way that you smoke cigarettes, let's say, for example, if you wanted to stimulate yourself, you would take quick drags, right?
Yeah.
And if you wanted to relax, you would do a slow inhale. So think about that in terms of mood stabilization. That's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
Like a human relationship, right?
Right. No, absolutely, 100%.
You can't compare. If you go home, you don't know how somebody's going to behave. But if you light a cigarette, you know exactly how it's going to calm you down and self-soothe you.
Right.
So that's the benefits.
Okay.
The consequences are that, of course, nicotine is like heroin in that it's very physically addicting. And so, what happens is that if you don't smoke a cigarette, that's when you start to see the physical withdrawal. And so you'll start to get irritable, just cranky, not be able to concentrate, salivate, just start to really experience withdrawal symptoms. And 1 in 8 adolescents currently is physically addicted to vaping.
Wow.
Which is significant. Of those 5 million, 4 million are high school students, 1 million are middle school students. So,
what?
I mean, middle school, like 12, 13, 14.
Because I remember when I was in middle school, we had like the group of smokers.
Yeah.
They were like cool kids, and they always went behind this cemetery area and smoked.
Yeah.
And it was that. But now they don't even have to hide it.
No.
Just go in their car.
Well, what happened now is it got introduced because kids didn't even know that they were smoking, nicotine. What they think they're doing is like, first of all, it looks like, high-tech, devices, which are sort of like an iPhone, an iPod.
Right.
Cool. And then the flavors are like strawberry kiwi and, whatever, banana split. I mean, you name it, they've got the flavor. And so I made up the banana split, by the way. I don't know if
they probably do have it. I mean,
if not, they can market it.
Right.
But the kids don't know that there's nicotine in it, and there's nicotine in it.
But how are they buying them, though? Because you can't buy tobacco anymore under the age of 21.
Yeah, well, you could always buy things if you want to buy
that's
things,
true.
right? That was never
true.
a problem. They sell it in St. Mark's Place for $5 a pop if you want. I only learned that from some of my, kids that I treat.
Interesting. Okay, so when do they usually come to you? The parents will bring them?
Yes.
Okay.
Most kids don't voluntarily say, hi, I want to go into drug treatment today. Good idea. Let me take you.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. That's not the way any addict gets into treatment. Not that I'm calling the kids addicts necessarily, but if somebody needs to go to treatment, it's usually the significant other that gets word way before the person who, because the person who has the problem, whatever the problem is always saying, I don't have a problem.
Well, right.
So it's the person who loves that person that says, well, I mean, this is a whole other topic.
Right.
But, so let's say if you and I are in a relationship and you start to have a problem, I say to you, I think you're using, you're going to tell me, no, I'm not. And I'll say, well, I found this in your room today, and you're going to say it's not mine. And I'm saying, who is it? And you're going to say it's my friend's, right?
Right.
Okay, so now I have a choice. I could believe in my own head that you have a problem, except for the fact that I love you. And so if you have a problem, that scares me.
Yeah.
I don't know if we have to be correct on how we speak here.
Nope.
Okay. So it scares the shit out of me.
Uh-huh.
So instead, I will sort of accept your excuse or your lie that it's really your friends.
Okay.
And I'll feel relieved a little by that, even though I'll sort of think you're lying to me, but I'm not sure. So that's round one.
Okay.
Round two is I go into your room, I'm your parent, and I see another vape pipe or, weed or whatever, and I say, hey, Madison, what's this? I found this again, and you're going to say to me, I can't believe you don't trust me. I can't believe you're in my room again. Right?
Right.
What are you doing here? And that's either you'll say it's your friends again, or you'll say that's so old, you don't even know what you're looking at. And so now again, I'm faced with this fact that, maybe she's right, maybe I am paranoid, maybe I'm crazy. And you see, to me, it's better that I think I'm got the problem than I think you got the problem.
Yeah.
Especially based on what the problem is. And if you're my kid, I really think like, I could be a crazy parent.
Yeah.
And maybe it's not so bad, and maybe I'm exaggerating, and, everybody does stuff, and I did stuff. So how do I know, really? When do I know, and how do I know? what to do.
Right.
And that's what I specialize in, is helping people with that.
So what are the ages of the kids that come to you, that are brought to you?
In the center, the ages are between theoretically 13, but we don't really get them at that age, about 14, 15, all the way to 30. So it's a unique program in that it really deals specifically with the developmental stage of adolescence and emergent adulthood, which I love both of those stages.
So at 30, their parents aren't bringing them. They're bringing themselves, I would assume.
No. Actually, I had a private practice before this, and I worked in other centers. The oldest parents I've had that brought their kid into treatment were parents of a 52-year-old. So I only work in a family.
Wow.
Yeah, I only work in a family model because, again, basically, look, pretend for a second you have a problem right now, okay? Who do you think's going to bring you to treatment or demand you go to treatment? It's the people,
a loved one.
Yeah, the people who love you and who really sticks with you at the end of the day. Your mother, your father, right?
Right, or your husband or wife if you have one,
No, they even leave.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah.
Even if they check out, like a husband and wife or boyfriend, girlfriend will only go like so far down the line. But then let's say the relationship breaks up because of it. Who do you think takes you back?
Yeah, if you're lucky, right?
If you're lucky, yeah.
So, okay, so let's talk about once they get to you breaking that addiction pattern.
Well, so what is it you want to know specifically?
So it's kind of like if somebody comes into your center, what's kind of the first step that they would experience?
Okay, well, the first step is really to have them come in together with their family.
Okay.
And again, it's because we view this really as a family problem. And the two sides of the relationship have to be restored. So it's not just that the person who has the drug alcohol problem has to, put down drugs and alcohol, for starters, but the family has to also rebalance in terms of gaining trust. Okay. So it can't be that, this relationship that was going back and forth in the negative has to somehow eventually at the end of treatment be flipped into a more positive, loving relationship again.
Right.
So all of treatment is really designed with that in mind. So it's, step by step. So the first step would be that they come to treatment for an evaluation. And the evaluation for adolescents is really complicated because how do you know that a kid who's quote-unquote smoking pot has a drug problem? Mm-hmm. How do you evaluate that? Because a lot of people are smoking pot at a certain age. Or how do you evaluate that somebody's drinking to excess, especially at that stage? And then what are the underlying influencers of that? So that question becomes really a point of evaluation. And one of the things that you would look at are the risk factors that would say to you, this kid, if like 10 of us are smoking pot for the first time, one of us will be more at risk than the others, but we don't know that. Right. So the question is, who is that person and what are the risk factors? And that's one of the things that we begin to look at. So some of them are, what's the genetic predisposition? Is there drugs, alcohol in the family? What's the intergenerational predisposition? As in, was there, and that's a whole other subject that I've studied and could talk about, but is there a family history of trauma that's been passed on from, I did a study on parents who were Holocaust survivors who have PTSD. Does PTSD get passed down to the offspring, and does that make the child more vulnerable then to PTSD and anxiety disorders? And then if they're more vulnerable to PTSD and anxiety disorders or mood disorders, then when they smoke or drink for the first time, then you see that they become more into the self-medication aspect of drugs. So it's not just, so even if we're all gathered for recreational use at a party, if I'm an anxious kid and I take a sip of this and it calms me down in a way that isn't an issue for you, I'm going to return to it in a different way than you might.
Right. So what about the parents? Like if I have a high school kid,
Yeah.
the whole thing of like you got to kind of try it. You know?
You do.
Like you got to try it, you got to live like it's normal for high school kids to drink, to sneak it. It's normal for college kids. I mean, college is all about drinking, and partying and living those wild things. And
well, that's why.
How do you know it's not too soon or too late for an addiction? Because I feel like 15, like you haven't even experienced your most wild, fun days.
Exactly. So, that's why I don't like to label kids as addicts, capital A, at the point that they come into treatment.
Okay.
I very much resist that because I think the jury is out, and I think that you don't really know what are the other factors, like what I was talking about. What's the role of mood disorder? What's the role of trauma? What's the role of family conflict and divorce that may be impacting the kid to use more excessively than their friends? But what I try to really look at is how is this interfering with functioning?
Yeah.
And that becomes like a main criteria, so that if you're, again, if all of us are at a party or at school and you're smoking, and your grades are starting to drop and you're starting to sneak around and your family is starting to like really freak out about it,
Right.
chances are you need to come to the center.
Okay.
And at least for now, we need to put down the drugs and alcohol so we can see what's going on with you and how can we better help you.
Right.
And then how we do that is a whole other piece of what I can talk about.
Okay. And is this outpatient or inpatient?
This will start always as outpatient.
Okay.
I mean, unless you're using something like opioids, or
Right.
cocaine or something over the top, or you're really a danger to self or others or suicidal, then it would be inpatient.
So how do you think like the government and the medical facility and everybody just everybody can start to break and reduce the addiction to the vapes? Like, what do you think it's going to take?
Well, that's a great question, I don't know what it's going to take. I think I started to look at it again yesterday, with this idea about how we frame the conversation.
Okay.
So even when we call it vape, it doesn't take on the significance that we were talking about, that it's really nicotine addiction and, marijuana addiction too. I mean, both of those numbers are really climbing very fast in very young adolescent developing brains. And so the word vape doesn't seem to convey that. For some reason, the word coronavirus,
Right. Right. It's alarms bells. Yeah.
Yeah. And I sit here thinking, is coronavirus I can't tell how dangerous it is. I'm on the subway last week and a woman has a mask on, and this is an aside, but I went with my mother-in-law to the ER, so they gave us masks for flu. So I held on to my mask.
Yeah.
You never know. And I got Chinese food on it, so then I washed my mask and I kept it because I know they're, going to be hoarding masks soon. I was in the nail salon and they all have masks, and she told me that they're having trouble getting masks. So I know I'm going off on this mask thing, but the point is that for whatever reason, people are getting the message that coronavirus isn't going to kill us. But vaping is, the message is not out there. So I think it's really about messaging. Vaping is going to, if you become addicted to nicotine through vaping, you can guarantee you're going to spend the next 10, 20, 25 years of your life trying to quit this, trying to quit.
I feel like also when it came to 2020, after this whole thing came out about vaping, that I saw more people smoking cigarettes. I think people started to go back because they were addicted to this.
Exactly.
And all of a sudden, now you saw just an increase of smokers everywhere.
Right, because they got the message a little bit about the device.
Yeah.
Okay, but what happened, and for the adult smokers who it was marketed to begin with, so they were smokers to cigarettes, and then they went off onto the device, and okay, now the device sucks, okay, so let me go back to smoking cigarettes.
Right.
But in the wake of that were all these kids who never smoked and now started to get the message, okay, stop vaping, but we're addicted to nicotine, and that's where you have the studies showing that those kids are also going back to going to start smoking cigarettes.
Well, right. Because it's like it's kind of saying like, well, at least with cigarettes, you've got, 20 to 40 years.
Yeah.
And then with the vaping, I think they were saying, so here's the thing too, is as marijuana becomes legal in more states and eventually probably
everywhere you walk around you're smelling it, right? It's like
right. So how do we keep that safe without having black market stuff that could kill people? Because like I still know people that smoke the pens, like the marijuana pens, but they say we're not worried because we're getting them from legal.
Yeah, from the medical marijuana, right, or from California, or
right.
Yeah.
So is that
dangerous? There's still a very large market for black market,
right?
Well,
especially
marijuana.
In states that aren't legal.
But even in states that are, in California there are, and in California, because they were getting income from the legal, they were themselves trying to crack down on the black market. But for some reason, the black market continues to exist, and I'm not sure why, but maybe it has to do with money and that it's less expensive, I would assume.
Yeah, because it's not cheap.
But how do you know, anyway, by the way? How do you really know if you and I get a vape pen right now? So I tell you what, that I got it in California at the medical store. Okay.
True.
Yeah, and I'm dealing it to you, by the way. So
yeah, no, you're right.
Isn't my incentive to, make money and get you the cheaper kind, if I could? And I don't care about you particularly.
Right. So so if you're going to do it, make sure you go to the store and.
Right, which we can't really do yet in New York, though we will.
Right, unless you have a license.
Well, medical problem. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I know it's just a crazy thing because there are benefits of the marijuana. It's just how you're consuming it. Right, like they've had cannabis oils really good, and the whole CBD thing that came out that's been very positive for people. And I grew up in Colorado, so when I go back, I'll go to those dispensaries. I mean, I've taken THC pills because I didn't want to smoke it, but I wanted to fall asleep. Which is basically an edible without chewing it, but you were able to monitor the milligrams. And there's all this different stuff, but when I have smoked weed, like a joint traditionally, in the past, the pain I would feel in my lungs hurt so bad, and that cough, it was,
which actually tells you that you've had enough.
It can't be good for you.
It's good for you in a paradoxical way, though, because if you smoke a little and you start coughing, then that's enough, right?
Right, okay, so that's the sign, right.
Right, which is the problem with vaping, is that you really don't get the same kind of brain signals.
Hurt.
Right. It's
it's
like eating, and you're wearing, stretch pants. The sign is not coming to you like I'm full. Stop.
So smoking the traditional joint isn't as harmful as a cigarette, as long as you stop when the cough starts to.
Right. Well, I think if you're asking me about the impact of cannabis versus nicotine, then nicotine.
I'm thinking for like lung cancer rates.
Well, lung cancer rates were it was the delivery system of the cigarettes that was really responsible to a large extent of causing lung cancer. And that's why this whole vaping thing came in, because it was going to stop the lung cancer rates from being what?
So what was the delivery mechanism that was causing?
The tar and nicotine that was coming in from burning the, the product.
And all the chemicals, okay.
Right, and the filter and, fiberglass and all of that.
So then the vaping came along.
Right, as an antidote to that it was going to be a safer way for adults to smoke their cigarettes. And ideally it was pitched that they were going to then get off of cigarettes and wean down off of cigarettes.
Right.
It was a very noble idea.
It was.
Theoretically.
So there's still some sort of burning to get that vapor into your lungs, but it doesn't have the tar and the carcinogens.
Right. Well, it comes in from the battery operated.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. But we don't know that yet for sure, what the impact of that is.
Right.
We don't know.
Right. And we're probably not going to know for a very long time.
But you wouldn't want your child then to say, oh, here, honey, you're 13. Why don't you try this?
Yeah, no.
Okay, no.
Yeah, no.
And now you're 15. Think this would be good for you right now.
Because I have friends, though, that smoke a lot of weed, and they're using those vape pens.
Yeah.
And I mean, it is an extraordinary amount.
Well, because you can, definitely smoke a lot of weed if you're using a vape pen.
Is their health okay?
Well,
or we don't...
how are you defining health? I mean, health or mental health? Because their mental health starts to go,
How so?
Because
I have some friends I feel like that can't function without it. They have such high anxiety that they almost need it to just calm down.
Right, because in a way, because that's really going back to the adolescent question again. What was the thing that motivated them towards that in the first place? And you could probably think that there's an underlying anxiety disorder. And for people who smoke weed, however form that you take to excess, however we decide excess, as in all day, all night, every day, wake up and smoke.
Right.
That's probably an underlying anxiety disorder of, severity. But then is the vaping or the using the marijuana addressing that? It's just masking that, and then eventually it's calling itself so that you feel like I can't really function without it. So that only creates more of a cycle on, the addictive cycle, right? Because then to not use creates the downside. So you start to use just to feel quote unquote normal.
Right, which is where the addiction comes in.
Which is where the compulsivity,
Jeez. So, and you're also a therapist.
Yes, I am.
We talked about addiction. So you do therapy as well, like traditional...
Yeah, traditional therapy.
And we had talked right before we went on air where something about billionaires came up. And not being happy. And what do you think is that psychological drive?
Well, what I see is that, it's interesting with addiction. I mean, addiction affects every walk of life from every socio-demographic group,
gambling, right?
I mean, so, in the inner cities where you're looking at low socio-demographics in terms of poverty, then you think of addiction in terms of, what the person lacks in their lives and the poor structure in the community, and there's the criminalization. You and I were talking a little bit about that in terms of who gets picked up for marijuana and who ends up going to like New York Center for Living as opposed to who ends up going to jail. Okay, you could say that that's a socio-demographic response right there, right? Because in the community where I work currently on the Upper East Side, for the most part, if you're going to get picked up with marijuana, you're not going to go to jail. And if you go to jail, you're going to be there for like a half a split second, not even, because, you can afford to have lawyers, and then you can afford to make a case, and then you can afford to go to rehab if you need to go to rehab. So there are a lot of different... that's one of the distinctions. But in terms of treating the wealthy, that's not to say that there's not substantial problems within that demographic.
Yeah.
There's just as much anxiety disorders. There's just as much family issues. Very oftentimes there's... issues around being raised, let's say, by your parents, if they could afford to have a lot of help. So there's the attachment conditions of, nurturing and attachment that maybe go wanting. That we treat.
Right. So it kind of goes to all those different levels.
It goes to that level.
So what are some of the things that you've seen as far as, like, is there a difference between addiction levels in the socioeconomic backgrounds?
Well, it's interesting. I worked on Long Island for many years, and in the Five-Town area, and
What's the Five-Town area?
that was, a sort of affluent community of
Okay.
Nassau County, and you get to see like what our community differences. Syosset, Belmore.
Okay.
In those days, the more wealthy the child, the more they were able to buy drugs. And in those days, some of the drugs that people used were, let's say, cocaine.
The rich person's drug is what
Right.
they've always called it.
Okay,
Yeah,
so in order to buy cocaine, you have to have money to buy cocaine, right?
absolutely.
And so, when you're 18, 19, and you have access to that kind of money, then there's no limit on you. So that's one problem. Another problem, and this goes into a whole area of, we okay on time?
Yeah,
Okay.
we're good.
Okay. So let's say you are a trust fund child,
Okay.
okay? This is another aspect of it. Or I'll start off with this. Let's say you are a business person, and you think you want your child to go into your business. And let's say the child doesn't want to go into the business. Okay, so one of the things that starts to happen is that, I'll give you an example. The child starts to develop a drug-alcohol problem, and they start to develop a drug-alcohol problem, let's say in middle school. Well, let's say in high school.
Okay.
And so you're affluent, and the kids' grades start to drop, so what do? You get them tutors, right? I mean, because you can afford to get them
Logical,
tutors.
yeah.
Okay. And then they start to not do well, and so you start to think, then you can take them to the psychiatrist, and then you could get them some Adderall so they can pay better attention in school and do better on their SATs. And you do what you can this is definitely the more wealthy version of addiction, right?
Okay.
And then child still not doing so well, but maybe you can afford to get them into college, and so they go to college. And then within the first year they start to, as you say, party, and they have a drug alcohol problem, and maybe they don't even make it through college. So what do you say to yourself? You say, well, they were never much of a student anyway, and here you have this family business, right?
Yeah.
I'll take them into the family business. We'll train them up in sales. And now I'm telling you a true story, actually, or a conglomerate of a true story.
Okay.
So we put them in sales. Well, we don't start them out at $20,000. We start them out because, it's my kids. So, we're going to start them out, let's say, hypothetically, at $50,000, $60,000, even though they didn't finish school or whatever, $70,000, give them a commission, whatever. Make them look like they're performing at a level that they're really not performing at, by the way. And
Right.
so what happens is, I'll finish the story with, so the person looks good, they attract a partner, they get married, but they still have a cocaine problem. But they're working now for their father, and they start to disappear on the job, and they start to get caught in all sorts of ways, except the father is now the employer, and so what does he do? He can't fire his kid because the kid is married now with two other kids that he's then going to have to support. So it gets very complicated very quickly. And that's
Yeah.
a version of drug addiction in the middle class, upper middle class version of addiction.
Okay.
We could take that same version and say, let's say the child doesn't even enter into the father's business. Let's say the child continues to do drugs and ends up sort of a ne'er-do-well, and they have a trust fund. And then they can't figure out, what am I going to do when I grow up? I don't know what to do with myself. I can never achieve what my family achieved. I can never be as successful as Daddy. So I can't even get in on a level of a job that maybe would bring me some dignity and feel like meaningful and worth, because it's almost like it's meaningless in the scheme of the family money. So the child flounders and you end up with this failure to launch issue that's
Interesting.
part of the drug problem, but it's also part of the failure to define who am I, which is why I love working with adolescents, to back to the whole circle again, working with adolescents and emergent adults, because you're getting them at a point in their lives where the drugs are just a symptom of the failure to develop.
Right, that makes complete sense.
And so our role is to then look at what developmental stage are they at. So if you're in high school, for example, and you're in 11th grade and you're starting to implode yourself, you can be sure you're going to be doing major damage to your life, because what happens in 11th grade, you're supposed to be taking your SATs, you're supposed to, now, again, I'm talking about the college-bound kid, but SATs and, starting to tee up where you're going to be with your life. And if you take yourself off developmentally, off of that track, I mean, you're really facing a tremendous fork in the road where your friends are going to start going one way and you're going to start to go another way.
Right.
Okay, so that's one crosswalk. The next is, again, as I described, the college kid who, all the friends stay in college and they don't, they bounce back, which there's a lot of theory that suggests that underlying drug addiction is really a failure to separate in an autonomous way from your family of origin. Like you can't really grow up and be independent. You bounce back into your parents' home. And even though you look like you're like a totally, leave me alone, I don't want to have anything to do with you, and you can like be really nasty as all hell with your family, you're totally dependent upon them.
Yeah.
Okay, and where are you getting your job? And as a delivery person, I mean, how long is that going to last? And then they start going through one job after another, and the family becomes really despairing. So that's that version, and then it just goes on from there. So sometimes you see people coming in their late 20s or their mid-20s. Let's say they followed somewhat of that trajectory. And usually when I see kids who are, let's say, 26, 27, that's when it really starts to hit them, because their friends that they grew up with are starting to, have finished college, have started to go into a career. Maybe some of them have significant others, and they start to feel really left behind, and they start to feel like, how am I ever going to catch up? I can't really go back to starting college, and that's what I was talking about, that failure to find themselves, So.
Which is a scary thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, being a kid is tough. I think it's even tougher today, especially with all the social media and the pressures are more online. I mean, before you could leave the pressures of school when you got into your home.
Well, you also learned a little bit about what it meant to be independent. Now I don't think we can go like, I can maybe make it out of this room before I start looking for my phone. I know.
Isn't it nice to kind of have your phone away, though? I try to be more aware of that. I try to put it in my bag. And I do actually feel happier when I don't have it. Sometimes.
Yeah. Today I was seeing a boy right today before I came here with his mom. And she was saying, he sleeps with his phone.
How old?
He's 16. He's 16.
Yeah, jeez. Like under his bed or under his pillow?
No, probably by his cheek, I would assume. I mean, that is a whole generation that since 2007 has really been raised with the telephone.
Yeah.
They don't even know what life is like. There's no concept of life without a phone.
Life was so much better when people couldn't find you.
Well, there was more mystery.
There was definitely more mystery, right? There was more excitement.
Yeah. You had to be more creative on how to track.
I remember I didn't want a phone when I was 19. My parents got me a cell phone. My first cell phone, you'd think I'd be ecstatic. I was a freshman in college. I said, I don't want it. I'd rather have clothes. So I sent it back. And they were like, what? And they were like, but how are we going to reach you? I don't know. I have a dorm number. I did not want them to be able to find me or track me. Well, and when I met cute boys, what did I do? I just gave them my friend's phone number. They're like, why are these boys calling me? because I don't have a cell phone. So, and then at 20, I finally jumped
Yeah, I was
on
going to say, how
jumped
long
on the
did that-
bandwagon.
Yeah, exactly.
They're like, these long distance calls are too expensive now. You need a cell phone. But yeah, it's a very interesting.
Well, parents do track their kids on the phone.
You have
Yeah,
to.
I run a parent group. They always come in and they say, he doesn't know, but I'm tracking him. Okay.
That's got to be frightening.
But can I tell you what the kids
the
do?
stuff don't they have like code?
Well,
like
they
languages?
take their cell phone,
Okay.
and I have a couple of kids in currently who, if they want to go find drugs, so they take their cell phone with them. The parents are tracking it, and they put their cell phone in like a bush somewhere, and then they go off. I mean, if you want to beat a system, you can always beat a system, right?
That's true. And don't they have like code words for stuff? Because everybody's kind of tracking. The parents are just tracking like certain words mean something. Or...
Right. But, there's always the internet to crack the code, right?
I know.
I mean, what can't you Google?
It's a scary thing, right? Oh, my gosh. It's a frightening thing. So what would be your advice for parents that are listening right now that are afraid that their kid is either going to start vaping or is vaping? What would be your advice to them and kind of how they can start to help them?
Well, I guess my advice for parents in general is, going back to that whole interchange that I described with you before where, you challenge the kid and the kid says to you, it's not me. And you say, no, it is you, I mean, oh, okay. Like by round 3, when you've gone back and forth and you say to your kid, I think there's a problem, and the kid's saying no. I mean, rather than coming back at them and saying, you're lying to me, basically it's understanding I'm allowing you to lie to me, so it's on me to do something about it, and I am the one who needs to have the epiphany, not you. I need to say to myself, you have a problem, what am I going to do about it? Not expect you to, from like the AA days of 1930s, you're going to hit bottom and come to me and say I need help. I mean, first of all, if you're my kid, I'm never going to allow you to hit bottom and come and say I need help, so let's be honest about that.
Right.
So then what are the typical actions? Okay, so the typical actions after that are, the parents saying, first, please don't ever, let's have a heart-to-heart, please don't ever do it again. Okay, so we know that doesn't work. Then it becomes, we had the heart-to-heart, now you're lying to me, and, the aggression starts, and that doesn't work. Then okay, maybe I'll bribe you.
Yeah.
I'll give you $100 a week, but not if you become addicted. It doesn't work. Pleading, but crying, begging, sneaking around. These are all tactics that don't work. Okay. Fighting, punishing. I'm going through everything that doesn't work first to say, because this is things that people really, honest to God, do. And, look, if I thought any of those worked, I'd say go ahead and do it, but it doesn't. Right. So the thing to do is, and there's 2 parts to your question. One was, what if you want to prevent somebody from using, which is different from what happens if somebody is using. So taking it from the point of, I think you're using, and fill in the blank. It could be vaping, it could be weed, it could be Xanax, it could be opioids, it could be, some stuff I found in your drawer and I can't even figure out what this stuff is. Okay. I need to say, look, we need a solution, and I'm going to take a step to get myself to get help to figure out how am I going to intervene. So this goes back to the vaping program. So what I designed was a program specifically for the nicotine. So we do have programs where obviously a parent can call us up for the marijuana as well as anything else. But for the nicotine, what I designed was a series of 3 info sessions. Okay. One to be run by a neurobiologist, and he does, he's a great guy, Dr. Stephen Dewey, and he shows brain imaging of what happens in your brain, literally, when you use drugs. So that's one thing.
Oh, wow.
The second is to have a pulmonologist there to talk about the impact on the lungs. The third is to have addictionologists there, our medical director of addiction, Maria Alikakis, and talking about, replacement therapies, because for nicotine you do sometimes need nicotine replacement. And then, Vaping 101. And for kids who really are serious about stopping, or families who really want to help their kids to stop, we are offering a smoking cessation program specifically designed for kids who are using e-cigarettes. So the point of this is that you come together with your family, because, again, I want to emphasize that healing is a family process.
Right.
And we have an open discussion. We don't have a sneaking around discussion. We can do urine screens to see if you're still using nicotine. We can help you, and we can help your family to help you to get on board to say, this is a problem we're going to all address together as a family.
Right.
So that's...
Well, that's great. And so how do they, where do they go to find you and find more information about this program?
They can call the New York Center for Living, and they can find me, which my number is easy. It's A Freshman, like a sophomore, junior, senior. So it's A Freshman at centerforliving.org, and the phone number is 212-712-8800.
And what about people that are not in New York? Do you have any recommendations of where they could?
The e-cigarette smoking right now is very limited on, even in New York. I don't really know of any other program that's really offering a program targeted to adolescents.
But they could call and at least get some information.
Right, or the U.S. Lung Association, which we're trying to pair with. And another thing I'm trying to do, really, which I like a lot, do you know the David Lynch Foundation and Transcendental Meditation?
I've heard of the TM. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm trying to, I'm going to be meeting with him in a few weeks. I'm trying to learn TM techniques to bring to kids, because what I'm really trying to do with addiction altogether is teach really positive replacement techniques, not just taking things away. So we have, this goes back to our programming a little, we have groups for, DBT, which is really how to address emotional regulation. We have groups for mindfulness. So how is it that if you're like saying something very provocative to me, rather than me like flip out on you, how can I like step back? I mean, this is easier said than done, of course, but how do I step back and, center myself, so to speak, and respond from, what they would call wise mind, as opposed to, berserk mind, although they don't call it berserk mind, but it is berserk mind.
Right.
So there's that, and then there's meditation. How do I calm myself down? How do I learn? And this TM, for example, they're teaching in high schools, they're teaching in prison populations, and they're teaching for mothers who've lost kids to addiction, and they're finding that there's tremendous health benefits. So I think if you can teach a good alternative behavior that you have at your fingertips or in your breath, that's a great thing to do.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on
Thank
the
you
show
for having
and
me.
Educating us about
Thank you.
the vaping and kind of what parents can do, because I know this is such a big issue that's going on, but with people like you, we can get one step closer to solving it.
I hope so. If we all join together, really.
You're doing a great thing.
You did a great thing by having me here to tell the story.
You.
So thank you for that.
Yeah. So Dr. Audrey Freshman, you guys go and check her out. She's at the New York Center for Living. Is it just newyorkcenterforliving.org?
Yeah.
Is the website. So go to their website. You can contact her if you have any questions.
I'd be glad to talk to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
And thank you guys for listening to another episode of Next to Madison. We'll see you guys next time to find out who's next. Hi, your host, Madison Malloy here. I just wanted to remind you guys to please follow the show on social media at Next to Madison. And if you have any questions or suggestions for the show, or you feel that you would be a great guest on the show and would love to be considered, please feel free to email me at nexttomadison@gmail.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on all podcast platforms. And I thank you again for listening.